Welcome to the Multimodal Experience podcast with your host, Bill Stakos. Today's guest is Brian Solis, and we are talking about humanizing technology and his book, Mind Shift: Transform Leadership, Drive Innovation, and Reshape the Future.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Multimodal Experience. I'm your host, Bill Stakos. Today, we have a true luminary of the digital age on the show. Brian Solis is a world-renowned digital anthropologist, 9-time best-selling author, and the head of global innovation at a company called ServiceNow. Where Brian really stands out relative to other leaders in his space is that he has a unique gift for humanizing technology, helping us understand how complex concepts like AI are reshaping our world. He has been recognized as one of the most creative and brilliant business minds of our time, and his work has influenced countless Fortune 500 companies and startups alike. His latest book, Mind Shift, is an incredibly powerful call to action for anyone who wants to thrive in an era of perpetual disruption. It's a conversation about leadership, innovation, and the one thing that will determine our future and our success in that future, our mindset. Welcome to the show, Brian. It's great to have you on.
What an intro, Bill. Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation because of all the times I can remember in terms of transformation and innovation, technology revolutions. This is it. And this is a really important time to have this conversation.
So let's get into the foundational mind shift question, right? In Mind Shift, great book, by the way, and I encourage readers, we'll put a link to the book in the show notes, et cetera. But you frame the core challenge, or one of the core challenges is overcoming industrial era thinking, right? In a world now defined by multimodal technologies, generative AI, we have spatial computing. What's the single most entrenched cognitive bias or legacy mindset that you see preventing leaders from truly embracing the future?
We all have biases because we're all human, and which sets of biases are really dependent on us as individuals, but also the culture in which we're operating. So we have bias of ourself and we have the collective bias of the company culture. For example, if you work for Sudhir Pinchar at Google versus a legacy company in the Midwest, you're going to have different corporate cultures. But if you want to transform, that also means you have to transform the culture of your organization, which means you have to transform the leadership of your organization. So I give that whole context because that's why the book was written. The book was written to shift mindsets for a new era because leaders typically address new things with old thinking that they'll get new outcomes. It was a call, whether for existing leaders to change their mindsets or to inspire a new genre of leaders to rise up because artificial intelligence, because of not just even technology disruptions, just think about all of the disruptions we're experiencing in life, socioeconomics, climate, etc. These are actual disruptions, and we try to put them in the box of business as usual. In doing so, we are taking something profound and trying to keep it in the box. Artificial intelligence cannot operate in the box, for example. The bias that goes back to industrial era thinking is how do we take something new and optimize it to make ourselves more efficient, to take costs out, to scale. The biases that lead to that are all over the place. But we can put them in a shopping bag of cognitive biases. If you think about how these biases work, whether they're recency biases, like you only think about the thing you've heard about most recently. Think about school, like elementary school. Think about the sports you played as a kid. Think about high school, university. Think about your quarterly reviews or your annual reviews at work. Everything that we have been taught is how do you operate within the rules of the system. And if you do well, you get high marks, you move up in a linear path. Fantastic. If you do not follow those rules, you are told you are not following those rules and it may affect your linear path, your growth. Those are the biases. Those are the rules that you self-govern and are also governed by others to put them in the box of business as usual. And so when something like AI comes along and it challenges your conventions, your natural human response is to operate within these guidelines because you know what happens if you don't.
Mm.
So that's the mind shift that we have to, as leaders, say it is okay to ask questions right now. Because if we don't ask questions, this is the first technology that's actually not going to reward people for following the rules. And that's part of the mind shift that we need to see it differently.
Yeah, I see this a lot with companies putting, let's put AI on this and see if it'll solve the problem versus taking a step back. One, is this a problem that we still need to solve? Two, what is value if we solve it? How do we define that? And then three, is AI the solution? If you're just putting AI on something, it's just going to enhance the problem even more, probably just scale it up and create more of a mess. That architecture, that rethinking, like what is that first step? So I'm a leader. I've read your book. You provide sort of that toolkit in there. But for our listeners, before they go out and buy the book, how do you take step one? Like what is the fundamental architecture of that mindset shift?
So I've read a lot of books. I've written a lot of books too. The one thing that I need as a reader is I need to first be coerced some clever way that I am reading it in the frame of mind that's going to help me get the most out of the book.
Hmm.
So going back to cognitive biases,
Hmm.
most of us are going to read the book and see ourselves in the book or in the story the way we are today. There's a famous quote that is, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are.
Yeah.
So what I did at the beginning of the book was just sort of set the stage. We talk about cognitive biases, the different types, to see if you can recognize yourself in any of them. We also kind of just opened the door with saying, hey, self-awareness is actually the number one thing needed to begin this journey. We all think we do. That's ironic that 100% of us think we are self-aware, but only actually 10% are. And those
Hmm.
10% tend to be a little bit more empathetic. They see and feel the way the other person experiences
Mm-hmm.
something. So especially when we talk about customer experiences, empathy is like one of the number one tools for transformation, but it's also one of the number one tools for leadership transformation. So
Hmm.
where we begin in the book is kind of going through this self-awareness story. Like, hey, did you know you're actually not self-aware, but told in the most inspirational and kind possible way. So that when you start to get to the first exercise, which is how to get a beginner's mind,
Mm-hmm.
you might not be convinced, you might not have changed your mind, you may not have opened it, but you might be aware that there's something to learn. And that's where I tell the story of a cup of tea and how the student has come to learn. And the master says, let's start by having a cup of tea. He's pouring the tea for the student, and the student keeps pouring, and the tea just overflows. And the student says, Master, if you're overflowing, he says, the cup is your mind, and you cannot learn anything unless you first empty it. And this is the context of the beginner's mind. We cannot see the potential for some new emerging trend or opportunity if we don't empty our mind. The concept of the beginner's mind is that we come to these moments as experts.
Mm.
We know that we can use technology to take costs out. We know that we could use technology to make things more efficient and better. And we're going to get high marks for that because that's what we've always done. Yeah, let's go. But the beginner's mind will have to take a step back and be more curious. What are we not asking?
Mm.
What is the potential here? What can it do that we couldn't do before? Because in these moments, it is the beginner's mind that can unlock opportunities, and it is the expert's mind that will see no opportunities except for the opportunities they know. So that's how we begin the journey in the book, is just getting to this place where the idea of the mind shift begins with having a receiver's state, being able
Mm.
to see the signals that these trends can help us unlock versus bringing that expert's mind to them and saying, I know what to do with this.
How does that manifest on the other side, right? So, like, if you think about the emotional moments of truth from a customer's perspective, how do brands or companies need to start thinking about that or even design for it ultimately? It's a really important point that you're bringing up.
Well, so let's bring that expert's mind
Hmm.
and the beginner's mind to this moment, and then say that somewhere in between those mindsets is the journey of empathy. This is important because in all of the years where I've done either a customer journey or an employee journey, we'll say things like moments of truth to make them sound more meaningful. But what we're really talking about is the way an expert's mind will look at it, which is a touch point.
Mhm.
And that touch point could be however we define the journey. When we start looking at it from that perspective, we bring that expert's mind to the touch point. We're looking at the numbers, like conversions, the transactions, the open rates, whatever our measures are. So now what we're doing is we're looking at the touch points from our perspective. And then how do we make it more efficient? How do we increase performance? How do we take cost out? How do we drive profitability? These are all the right questions to be asking,
Mhm.
but we're thinking about them now as transactional. And customers don't wake up in the morning and say, I hope that when I go shopping today or when I call customer service today, that I'm seen as a number and viewed as a transaction. They are also coming to that moment with their mindset, which is,
Mm.
I'm the most important person in the world. This is all about me. I have hero complex. Let's go. They're coming at this moment completely different. The irony of this, and I'm surprised that companies have been able to get away with this at scale for so many years, is that the customer is the most important person before a transaction. And suddenly, after that transaction, how can we make that a cost center? Because if we look at you in the frame of a cost center, now you don't matter. We're going to put self-service, chatbot,
Yeah.
IVR back in the day so that you don't talk to human beings and you have to try to navigate your way around a phone system.
I've never
And
thought about
none of those things are meant to give you a good experience. And the only reason I'm sharing all of this is because the word experience is something that we all take for granted as executives in any touch point, in
Mhm.
any moment of truth. Thank you,
Just,
sir. That book was designed as the message of the book to be an experience. When I was trying to find a definition for experience and footnote it and move on, I couldn't find one because we were all, as experts, defining the word experience from that transactional state. So customer experience became these touch points and moments of truth and all this
Mhm.
vernacular. But instead, I said, can we all agree that an experience is how someone feels in a particular moment? And based on how they feel is how they're going to remember that moment. And if you think about an experience in that context, then when you look at a moment of truth, how is someone going to feel in it?
Mm.
And in turn, how are they going to remember it? Because there's only two experiences that someone remembers: experiences that suck and experiences that are fantastic. And if we're designing them to be transactional, then we're designing them to be forgettable. That is where we start to lose.
Mm.
If you design something to be extraordinary, then it is extraordinary and it is remembered that way. And that's the magic of Disney, by the way. This is how they design a lot of their experiences. But when I've done work in the past with, say, Virgin America, if you remember that airline, it was designed to be an experiential airline in a moment where you were a complete transaction. Even the boarding passes were horrible and still are in many cases,
Mm.
except for the digital ones. But the work I did with Zappos, where even customer service was marketing, that was a game changer. And so we took all of these opportunities. And when you design experiences, what ends up happening is that those moments of truth, and I know, Bill, this is the longest answer
No.
ever. When you invest in what you thought was a cost center, it ends up being a growth center. For example, with Zappos, we didn't have to offer discounts. People were just glad to come back. We also did counterintuitive things like empowering customer service agents to have their own budget to make something right. There's a great story of an agent finding out that someone was a big fan of a particular basketball team. They not only made the customer right by the challenge that they were having, they sent them basketball tickets. And did that hit the bottom line? 100%. But did
Mm.
that person spend in multitudes over time? Yeah, because we changed the metrics from cost of that particular transaction, how long did it take to get to resolution, et cetera, to what was the lifetime value of that customer.
Mm.
And so that was a leadership level decision with Tony Hsieh And he was the leader who believed in experiences at that level. So that mind shift can transform the business across the gamut. Another company that does it really
Mm.
well, did it well better before, it's still okay today, is Apple. They realized that if they could deliver a great experience from beginning to end, that they could charge more for their products. And that became a growth engine. This is an example of just how far this can go. Tony Hsieh recognized at Zappos that if he shipped a pair of shoes to you, the experience starts from the moment you anticipate those shoes to arrive, when that box arrives on your doorstep, and when you open that box. Apple has done this too. This is why their boxes are so
So
beautiful.
hard to open, right?
He couldn't control it if he was drop shipping, which is what a lot of e-commerce companies
Hmm.
do. So he took control of the logistics of shipping, branded the boxes, made sure the
Hmm.
boxes had that sort of look and feel, because that's the moment that the experience actually began. You can take this as far as you want to go. And if you do it the right way, it all drives growth.
So you've been a big advocate of storytelling, even describing leaders as storytellers. When you think about creating a future that doesn't exist, what advice would you have for leaders to be able to develop and tell those stories that provides a practical, from like what it is, so what to what now kind of roadmap? Because a lot of this is change management and leadership at the end of the day. What advice do you have for leaders to inspire that future? So many people are afraid of AI as an example. Like, don't be afraid of this. We're going to use this to our advantage. Like, I get the beginner's mindset, but how might you frame, if you're coaching a leader, how might you frame that storytelling capability or ability and start to hone it?
I think every book, maybe the last 3 books I've written, has at least some reference to the hero's journey and
Mm,
some chapters dedicated to storytelling in that particular frame. For example, there's a quote here: "The world is full of magical things waiting patiently for our senses to grow sharper." On the other side of storytelling is how you bring that to life. As a storyteller, you have to embrace things like wonder and curiosity,
mm,
childlike wonder. This is the concept of a beginner's mind. You have to see something that someone else can't. That's where storytelling begins. For example, I tell the story of my friend Nicholas Sung, who is a former storyboard artist at Pixar. He did movies like one of my favorites, Up. I think now he's a storyboard artist at Netflix. For a time, he was also helping companies understand the magic of storytelling. This particular story I tell in the book is one where Nick worked with Nike, and Nike, I'll say this in the nicest way possible. There's just a time where they weren't about the people who wear their shoes.
yeah, yeah.
And it became a company about numbers, all the things that happen to what we call a short term mindset or quarter to quarter mindset. He used storyboarding as a way to remind them of why people put on their shoes. And there's different types of reasons. Of course, there's the shoe drop, the shoe aficionado, et cetera. But then there's the runner who convinces themselves that they can do a marathon. And that story has to be one that's told. The reason we have to start with things like wonder and curiosity and that beginner's mindset is because we think storytelling at a high level is about how well you can tell a story.
Hmm.
And so people say, I'm a great storyteller. I got people laughing. I got people feeling like this thing. Every time I tell a story, people lean in. When we're at campfires, I'll tell a story about grandma and this and that. And I'm sure there are things that make them great storytellers, but we tend to kind of step back and think again like, I'm a great storyteller because of these things. What makes a great storyteller is they see something that the audience does not. And what they do better than anyone else is they get that person to see themselves in what they couldn't see before and believe it is their story. And this is what Disney and Pixar do
Mm,
so well. So the concept of a storyboard is not to tell the story, it's to test it. Can I get you to believe it?
mm,
Do I get you to relate to it? And do you see yourself as the main character? And do you root for that outcome? The outcome is the change you want to see, change in that mindset. the art of storytelling, it's all possible for us to do that. It's just taking ourselves out of that position where we think we know that if I tell you this, you're going to believe it. This is why, for example, we hear stories of things like, oh, it's going to take jobs, it's going
Yeah.
to increase efficiencies. This is called the Cassandra complex. People just tell this story and they think change is going to come out from it. What it ends up doing is causing fear, anxiety, uncertainty, and shutting people down. So you got to tell the story in a different way. We have to take a step back. We have to wonder. We have to ask different questions. We have to be curious. Like, what are some of the things that we could do where it makes people do what they couldn't do before? And could that drive growth for the organization if we invest in it when everybody else is going to invest in automation? And so, a great story about that is IKEA. So, IKEA, they deploy a chatbot like what most companies want to, which is to improve customer service, but make it more efficient and effective. Their agent ends up taking 47% to resolution straight away. Huge number. And that means that a normal mindset would say 47%, that's cost we could take out. AI is already proving this. But they looked to say, what is the other 53%? What's not being solved? What could we do that could solve for that and maybe make better situations, experiences, services for our customers? And it turned out that a lot of them were about interior design, whether it was for business, personal, or consumer applications. So they reskilled those human agents as interior designers, spun it out as a pilot. In the first year, that new service generated 1 billion euros of net new revenue. So you have
Incredible.
cost takeout and you have cost growth.
Mm.
I know we're going to run out of time, but I'll tell one super fast
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Airbnb used Nick Sung to storyboard, to tell the story to the board and to investors when they were at their lowest point. This is years ago, before the rebrand, before they became an experience company, to tell the story of why somebody put their house or their home on Airbnb to let strangers stay in it, or why strangers came to that house instead of going to the Marriott or the Hilton. So when you can put someone in the story to see the outcome you need them to see, but feel it because they're the hero of the story, they're going through the ups and downs, they gain empathy along the way. That's how you get someone to see it. It's not easy, but that's how you get
Yeah.
someone to do it. And it starts by believing right now that you're not doing it today.
One last question, 2 minutes or less, as we move deeper into digital experiences, multimodal experiences, as consumers, how should our mindset shift in terms of the decisions and making sure that these technologies are serving us and maybe not serving the brands we buy from?
We can't do this one in 2 minutes.
We'll have
I wrote a book called Life Scale. It was the realization, because I'm also a digital anthropologist who studies how technology affects behaviors. I had observed, this is like 10 years ago, that social media, mobile devices were actually controlling us from an attention standpoint. And then what happens once they give all your attention? These are the things that happen to your brain, your body, et cetera. And then how to take back control without giving up technology. Same thing is happening with AI right now, AI psychosis. There's studies that show that we're starting to talk like it. There's studies that show that we're actually eroding our creativity and critical thinking skills by depending on it, letting it do the thinking for us. This is a hard one to answer because we're not, as consumers, doing anything about it. If you think about what TikTok has done to the brain, that's made it faster, it's made it shallower. We call it TikTok brain because when we try to design experiences for the TikTok brain, we have to go with that mindset. This is why people watch podcasts and YouTube videos at 1.5x speed.
No one in this show, Brian.
Yeah, please listen to this at 1.2 at the most. Maybe this is where we pick up in the next episode. This is one where we have to be mindful. I call it an ignite moment. And the ignite moment is knowing the consumer is not going to look out for themselves, but you could. And you could give them a touch point, a moment of truth, of respite, of illumination. And what could that look like? Where you slow it down just enough for them to say, that's extraordinary. That's different. And so we could get into the art of the ignite moment. It was actually supposed to be part 2 to X, and then I got distracted with Life Scale. But maybe we could talk about it and that verbally form an outline for the next.
Beautifully said, by the way. And that's a beautiful way to end this episode. Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show. We will post your details and where to find you on LinkedIn and other spots, as well as your books on the show notes. Until next time, folks, stay curious, keep changing the status quo, inspire others, and create the future of experience. Thank you very much, Brian. It's great to have you on.
Looking forward to the next conversation. Thank you.